Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Second Look Bible study, where a second look always takes you deeper into God's Word. I see that my camera is glitchy. In fact, it all crashed on me right before I started, so I'll do my best to get through this today. Not quite sure what the story is and why it's acting the way it is. If you've joined us, please drop me a line and let me know exactly what is going on. Take a look and see if anybody is with us and see if there's any comments. Today, we are going to be covering the book of First Chronicles. Now, as we have done in each section, before we start into our Bible study, we've been doing what I've been calling 5 out of 5, and it is simply a little quiz. And so let's jump into it and see how well you do with our quiz today. Question number 1, and again, place the answers in the comment section. Number 1, which Old Testament book tells the story of King Solomon? Which Old Testament book tells the story of King Solomon? Now, I'll be very honest with you, it will be much easier for you to come up with these answers if you picture each book in the cartoon picture that we've used from Walk Through the Bible. So, question 1, what Old Testament book tells the story of King Solomon? Number 2, what Old Testament book tells the story of the Assyrian and Babylonian exile? Which book of the Old Testament tells the story of the Assyrian and Babylonian exile? Question number 3, what do we mean by the term exile? What is an exile? I'll give you 4 possible answers. Number 1, being trapped on an island. Number 2, being forced to leave one's homeland due to a foreign conquest. 3, a temporary pilgrimage to strengthen one's faith. Or 4, a diplomatic arrangement between Israel and the surrounding nations. So which of those is an exile? Question number 4, which king of Israel had no heart for God? Which king of Israel had no heart for God? And again, do the walk through the Bible pictures. And question number 5, which king was known for his wisdom, his women, and his wealth? And again, those should be relatively easy. So let's see what kind of comments we're getting. If anyone has joined us live, if not, then certainly you who are watching after the fact, put your comments in the comment section. Number 1, what Old Testament book tells the story of King Solomon? That's the book of 1 Kings. One king standing, had a half a heart for God. We see the women in the background. We know he's known for his wisdom and, of course, his wealth. Number 2, what Old Testament book tells the story of the Assyrian and Babylonian exile? That would take place in the book of 2 Kings. If you remember, the picture there was 2 kings sitting on an island. Question number 3, what do we mean by the term exile? Now, I intentionally misled you a little bit here. The correct answer is an exile is being forced to leave one's homeland due to foreign conquest. Both the nation of Israel was sent into exile. That means they were captured by, this time, the Assyrians and carried off to live in Assyria. And the second exile was the Babylonian exile, where the kingdom of Judah was carried off to live in Babylon. Those are the exiles. Question number 4 is, which king of Israel had no heart for God? Again, from our pictures, you'll remember that was King Saul in 1 Samuel. And then number 5, which king was known for his wisdom, women, and wealth? I already kind of gave you a hint on that, and that was King Solomon. So let's take a look at our Old Testament timeline just to see where we are, and then we'll do a real fast review. This is the expanded version of the Bible timeline. Now, in this particular timeline, we've already covered creation and the patriarchs. That was in Genesis. We've covered the period of time of the exile, where they're led from their Egyptian captivity, and that covered the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Then we saw the conquest of the land of Israel. That was in Joshua. And then the period of time of the Judges in the book of Judges. The next section that we came to was the one that we're currently in, and it's represented by the crown on the picture there. And it covers the book of 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, and 1 and 2 Chronicles. Now you'll notice I've added a red arrow. And that red arrow tells us that while these two books were covering this same period of time, they were actually written after the exile was over. So that's an important distinction to keep in mind. So let's look at the books that we've talked about so far. We talked about the book of 1 Samuel, and the book of 1 Samuel, remember Samuel was King Saul, see the saw in his hand? And he had no heart for God. That's King Saul. The second book is the book of 2 Samuel. We got 2 Samuels in our picture now, and we can tell that this book is going to be about King David. We see the harp in his hand, the slingshot at his side, and he has a whole heart for God. That's the book of 2 Samuel. And then we go to the book of 1 Kings. 1 Kings tells us the story of King Solomon. There you see the wisdom, the women, the wealth. And you see the split bag that he is holding, and the coins are falling out. And that is to remind us that it's right after his reign that the kingdom is going to be divided into 2 kingdoms. The kingdom of Judah to the north, and Israel to the north, and Judah to the south. And then we move to the book of 2 Kings, and the book of 2 Kings is the period of time of the exile. The exile. We see that both Israel is carried off into exile and Judah is carried off into exile. There were really 20 kings in the northern section of Israel, and they were all bad. We had 19 kings in 2 Kings for the kingdom of Judah, and they were a mixed bag. There was about 7 of them that we could consider to be good, and even some of them kind of fell off after their reign. The 2 nations fell into exile, carried away by their captors. Israel, the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes, was carried off into captivity by the Assyrians in 722 BC. Now, the people were mixed with the people of Assyria, and it really makes it difficult today to know who's of the 10 tribes. The southern kingdom of Judah had 2 tribes, and that was Judah and Benjamin, and they were carried off into captivity in 586 BC, which is much later. Remember, the numbers are working backwards towards 0. And so we see the Assyrians carried Israel into captivity in 722, and the Babylonians carried Judah into captivity in 586. And so that was the exile. Now, today we're going to look at the book of 1 Chronicles. The book of 1 Chronicles is going to cover the same period of time as 1 and 2 Samuel. It's going to basically tell us the story of King David. All right? What's the difference between the book of Chronicles and the book of 1 and 2 Samuel? They cover the same period of time, and there are certain similarities that exist. Let's talk about the similarities for just a moment. Now, both books are going to cover the reigns of Judah's king, including major events like building of the temple and the division of the kingdom and the exile. They're both going to stress the importance of faithfulness to God and the consequences of disobedience. There's many passages in 1 Chronicles that parallel those in 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. For example, in 1 Chronicles chapter 17, verses 11 through 14, you can find almost that entire passage word for word in 2nd Samuel chapter 7, verse 12 through 16. So what are the differences then? Well, it's important for us to note that the book of Kings was written during the Babylonian Empire, all right? In other words, once Judah was taken into captivity by the Babylonians, and many people were taken and moved to Babylon. That's where we'll meet Daniel in a coming lesson. That was somewhere around 550 to 560 BC, about 500 years before Christ. And it's going to focus on explaining why Israel and Judah fell, highlighting the consequences of their disobedience. Chronicles, on the other hand, is going to be written after the exile is over. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead in the story, but there's going to arise a king after the king of Babylon. That was Nebuchadnezzar. Eventually, there is going to be the king of Persia who is going to come on the scene, and he's going to allow the Israelites to return to their homeland of Judah, and they're going to rebuild the temple. It is this time when they go back to the area of Judah, somewhere around 450 to 440 BC, about 100 years after the writing of the Kings. And the whole purpose of the book of Chronicles is to inspire hope and to emphasize God's faithfulness and the restoration of worship. Now, the book of Kings is going to present a balanced view of both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The book of Chronicles is going to focus almost entirely on Judah, and especially the Davidic line. And it's going to portray both David and Solomon much more favorably. The book of 1st and 2nd Chronicles is not going to tell us the ugly portion. It's not going to talk about David's affair with Bathsheba. It's not going to talk about Solomon's idolatry. It's going to present much more of an idolized or much more of a positive view of both kingdoms. It's going to highlight their successes, but it's going to admit some of their failures. And the reason for that is the purpose of the two books are very, very different. The book of Kings is going to show God's judgment extending to future generations. You disobey, this is going to happen. The purpose of the book of Chronicles is going to focus on how God deals with the kings within their own lifetime and how God is giving hope to the children of Judah and Israel. So let me show you real quickly a comparison again. This is a similarity and difference that I think is important to take a look at. I probably should show you this first. Again, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings will deal with the political history of Israel and Judah, where the book of Chronicles is going to be the religious history of Judah. And it is a much more hopeful book in talking about the positive aspects of God's plan for them. Now, the similarities and differences. I prepared this chart to kind of help you to see. The focus of 1st Chronicles is going to be on Judah, that's the southern kingdom, and the Davidic dynasty, the kings that were in the ancestral chain of King David. Where 1st Kings is going to talk about both Israel and Judah. The perspective in Chronicles is going to be post-exile, after the exile is over, and it's going to have a very hopeful perspective. Kings on the other hand, is written before the exile, and its emphasis is on judgment. The treatment of the kings in Chronicles is going to be an idealized portrayal, where in 1 Kings it's going to be a very balanced portrayal. The emphasis is going to be on worship and the priesthood in Chronicles, and in Kings it's going to be on the political and moral consequences of their behavior. The prophetic role in 1 Chronicles is going to focus on the priests and the Levites, where in 1 Kings it's about the prophetic prophets, Elijah, Elisha, and some others. And so while the two books are very similar, they are written for different purposes, all right? For different purposes. So here was the picture again of 1 Chronicles. Do you see the boy selling a newspaper with the photo of King David on the front? In the newspaper's editorial section, they give their opinion about what is going on in the world. In a way, the book of 1 Chronicles gives us God's editorial on David. It tells us of God's opinion of David's time as the king of Israel. So again, very similar to the book of 1 and 2 Samuel, but it's really going to give us the picture of how God felt about David, how David was a man after God's own heart. 1 Chronicles is a historical and theological account of Israel's past, focusing on David's reign and his preparations for temple worship. Now, unlike 1 Kings, which deals with both Israel and Judah's history with an emphasis on the political and the moral consequences, 1 Chronicles is going to tell Israel's history with a priestly, hopeful perspective, emphasizing David's covenant with God and the importance of worship. Now, who wrote the book of 1 Chronicles? Boy, I'm having trouble with everything freezing here. Well, you're going to have to see a picture of me while I do it. Traditionally, it is attributed to Ezra, but it was written by an anonymous post-exile historian simply known as the Chronicler. Now, we're not sure who that might be. It may be Ezra. And it was written about 450 to 400 BC. That was after the Babylonian exile. And its purpose was to encourage the Israelites to renew their commitment to God. They're coming back from exile from Babylon. They're reestablishing their nation. They're rebuilding their temple. And so the book of 1st and 2nd Chronicles is designed for them to see what God thinks about everything that is going on. Now, the key people in the book of 1st Chronicles. And again, I apologize. You're getting still pictures now, and I'm not quite sure what's going on here, but that's simply the way it is. The first 9 chapters of Chronicles is going to have a whole lot of genealogies and lists. In chapter 1, it's going to trace the genealogies from Adam to Abraham, all right? And it traces the origin from humanity through Noah and Abraham. Then chapters 2 through 8 are going to deal with the tribes of Israel. It's going to list the lineage of the 12 tribes with a special focus on Judah, that is David's line, and Levi, the priestly families. And then chapter 9 of 1 Chronicles is going to talk about the returning exiles, those who are going to resettle in Jerusalem after the period of time of the exile. Now, the chapters 10 through 29 are going to talk about the death of King Saul, the rise of King David. David is going to become the king after Saul's downfall. We're going to read in chapter 11 about David's mighty men. We're going to provide a list of his elite warriors. We're going to read about the Ark of the Covenant in chapters 13 and chapters 15 and 16. David's going to bring the Ark to Jerusalem, and the emphasis is going to be on temple worship. Chapter 17 is going to talk about God's covenant with David, where God promised David an everlasting covenant. And then We see David's military victories in chapters 18 through 20. And in chapters 22 through 29, it's going to talk about the temple preparations. Although Solomon builds the temple, it's David who meticulously plans it. God did not allow him to build the temple, however, because of his warlike nature. Now, I'm going to move ahead here with some of my slides, but I don't think they're going to work. Oh, this one's working. So unlike Kings, which deals with the political struggles and divine judgment, First Chronicles offers that theological reflection on Israel's history, and it's going to focus on God's faithfulness and restoration. Again, it's God's editorial. Remember our big picture. First Chronicles highlights God's covenant with David as central to Israel's destiny, and it presents an idealized version of David. It assures the post-exile community that God's promises remain intact even after the exile is over. In other words, they've just experienced judgment, and now they're told that God still loves them and God still has a plan for their life. The central theme of First Chronicles is the Davidic covenant, which highlights God's promise to establish David's lineage forever. Unlike First Kings, which deals with both Israel and Judah, First Chronicles primarily portrays Judah's history, glorifying David. That's the reason he's on the cover of the editorial page in our picture, and it's going to glorify David's reign and his preparation for temple worship. Perhaps the most important thing that I want you to see in this big picture of First Chronicles, what I want you to see is the idea of First Chronicles offering spiritually uplifting perspective, reminding the people who have survived the exile about Israel's divine calling and God's plan for them. God is going to bring the Messiah into the world through the kingdom of Judah. And that's why they're going back to Israel, to the area of Jerusalem, and they're going to rebuild their kingdom. This is the same temple that we're going to see in Jesus' day, about 400 years later. So we're moving through the Old Testament history very, very quickly. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that. I apologize for the bugs in the system today. Not quite sure what's going on. I had to immediately redo the cameras to start this lesson. That's why I was a minute or two late. For some reason, none of the cameras wanted to work. So we've got them working, but we also see them freezing. So I apologize for that. I do want to remind you that they're changing the rules in Facebook starting in June. They'll only be keeping up any type of live Facebook message for 1 month, and then it's going to be deleted. So if you want to have access to the Bible studies on a continual basis, you'll need to check out my YouTube channel, which is www.youtube.com/Jim Schaefer 8933/playlist. And under playlist, you'll see all of the various series that I have taught, including this one on understanding the Old Testament. Thank you again. I appreciate each and every one of you. Again, I'll stay on Facebook for a few minutes answering any questions that you might have. I want to thank you, and I appreciate you for watching.